If you were to ask me to make a list of my top 5 favorite anime of all time, and then ask me to make a list of the top 5 anime that influenced me the most, there would probably be a lot of overlap, but it wouldn't necessarily be one-to-one. For example, Gurren Lagann and Cowboy Bebop are basically tied for both my favorite animes of all time and the most impactful. On the flip side, we have shows like Reincarnated as a Slime, which is one of my favorites, but hasn't been that influential on me. Or, on the flip side of that, something like Inuyasha, which was hugely influential in getting me into anime, but has since been replaced on my top spots list. If I was going to round out my list of most influential anime, it would have to be Cowboy Bebop, Gurren Lagann, Full Metal Alchemist, Dragon Ball, and Trigun. Each one of these shows introduced me to something new and opened my worldview for what anime as a medium could be. And out of that list, today, I want to focus on Trigun specifically. I don't actually know how Trigun first came into my life. I don't even really remember watching it for the first time. And looking back, it just sort of appeared in my collective consciousness one day. I existed in a time before Trigun, and now I exist in a world post-Trigun. But that's not to say that it didn't leave an impact on me, and that's far from the truth. Trigun was the first non-shonen that I really watched and enjoyed, and it was also the first quote-unquote good anime I watched. To this day, if someone is recommending good starter anime for people to watch, I always find Trigun winding its way into the conversation. However, when I think about Trigun and the impact it had on me, I've come to the realization that the impact largely had almost nothing to do with the show itself. To explain this, we have to explore my childhood a little bit. The only constant for me growing up was change. To give you some perspective, by the time I was 18, I'd moved 20 times. Stability was not exactly a word in my vocabulary. I remember Trigun coming into my worldview around 7th grade. I had just moved to North Carolina from California, and starting all over was different this time. This move marked a new period of my life and really broke me out of my shell socially. And the reason for this is actually kind of simple and a little sad. It's the first time in my life that I remember having a best friend. We met on the bus to school one day. We bonded over video games, and as a kid, that was enough to start a friendship. As two young nerdy kids, we spent a lot of time doing what I can now only describe, looking back, as LARPing. We'd sword fight, we'd create characters and stories, and just act it all out while running around the neighborhood. It was a great time, and definitely one of the contributing factors to my love of fiction and to my love of Dungeons & Dragons today. Throughout all of this, the media we consumed began to play a larger and larger role in the stories we would create, and Trigun became the epicenter of this. While I identified with the hero Vash, my friend deeply resonated with Knives. This dynamic reverberated across almost all of our interactions. Every character, every story, every piece of fiction we consumed together split us on opposite sides of the fandom. I still feel the effects of this to this day, even though I haven't spoken to this friend of mine in nearly a decade. And I can't help but think of all of this every time I think about Trigun. So as I was on this mission of rediscovery of anime, I figured it was time to re-explore the depths that lurk beneath the sands of Trigun. Because at the end of the day, I don't remember anything about Trigun. I just remember the impact that it had on my young life. And that's what makes the rewatch of Trigun so different, especially contrasting it with Soul Eater. I remembered watching Soul Eater, and different arcs, different story beats, well, not crisp in my mind, were there at least, and I had a basic understanding of what was going to happen next. With Trigun, on the other hand, I really only remembered the ending and one specific episode. It's a rare experience to be able to rewatch something that ended up meaning so much to you and being able to do it as if it was for the first time. That alone made this a bit special, and I'm so glad I chose to go back and rewatch Trigun because I fell in love all over again with this show, and the characters and the impact that it had on my life finally began to make a little more sense. So what is Trigun? Well, Trigun is about Vash the Stampede, a man who has been classified as humanity's first walking natural disaster. He has a bounty of $60 billion double dollars placed on his head, and this is the entire driving force for much of the anime. But what really stood out for me is how the story is crafted, and almost right away it adopts this mantra of show, don't tell. And that's for better and for worse. Trigun starts off as an episodic story that loosely has some sort of common thread weaved through it. But largely each episode is dedicated towards building the lore of the setting or building the personality of Vash. For someone who loves character development over flashy action sequences, this is amazing, and I really felt a connection towards the setting and the characters. However, it can be said that Trigun is a bit slow, and if you're not into slower pacings, this probably won't be the anime for you. I mean, it's not until episode 17 that we really start to get answers to long-formed questions, and while I absolutely love that story choice, it won't be for everybody. Trigun's main conflict is one rooted in philosophy and human nature as a whole. Vash's defining characteristic is compassion and a dedication to preventing suffering. While he puts on this facade of a bumbling fool, you start to realize that near everything he does is calculated, and that there's more to his story and character than he lets on. Every enemy that he encounters challenges his cardinal rules and beliefs, but throughout it all, he keeps steady and embodies turning the other cheek. This stands in stark contrast to the world around him. Life is meaningless and worthless to many of the inhabitants of the world. Everyone is out for themselves and just trying to survive the harsh realities of their life. The setup, while simplistic in nature, is much harder to execute in a meaningful way, but Trigun really nails the delivery. It hits the mark in some very beautiful ways that leave you wanting more, and quite honestly left me wanting to be a better person. Vash makes you feel like being kind is just a choice, and that even through adversity, you can strive to be kind. And while Trigun is wholly about Vash's story, we can take a step back to look at his supporting cast. From the very beginning, we have Millie and Meryl from the Bernadelli Insurance Company, who kind of offer as our window into the series. They kind of stand in for the audience. They do have moments where they are impactful, but largely they are just the eyes in which we process everything that happens to Vash throughout the series. Now, Meryl does have the added role of being the very clear love interest for Vash from the start, and they have a very stereotypical relationship. Meryl is very clearly a tsundere who rejects Vash, but very clearly develops a crush on him. And while it's not the deepest of storylines, it does add a nice little layer and tension between the two characters, and honestly, they're a nice looking couple. The only other main character to really focus on is Nicholas D. Wolfwood. He exists as a foil to Vash. In almost every single way, they are opposed to one another. While Vash is committed to changing the world around him through nonviolent ends, Wolfwood knows that in this dog-eat-dog world, you're gonna have to break a couple eggs in order to effect change. Their dynamic and friendship is really well done, and you can see each of them rubbing off on the other. Wolfwood causes Vash to become more callous, and Vash causes Wolfwood to be more kind and softer. It's a really well done dynamic that really emphasizes all of the character work and story building that the first part spends so long laboring to establish. In addition, Wolfwood acts as a foil to the relationship of Meryl and Vash as he develops a romantic relationship with Millie that is much more out in the open. They're outwardly flirty. It's a really stark contrast to the cat and mouse game that Meryl plays with Vash. And again, while these tropes and these themes are not exactly the deepest, and they're not executed in some groundbreaking way, if I had to liken it to anything else, it really makes me feel like Final Fantasy 15, where you believe these characters are on a road trip together, that they're traveling together, that they're friends. It's a subtle touch that goes a long way at just adding credibility to the story. And by the time the story kicks in proper, you're so invested in Vash's character and what happens to him, as well as the supporting characters. As a shonen kid, this change of pace and de-emphasis on violence as the answer to all problems was pretty groundbreaking and really cemented my love of character-focused stories. All of the world building, the slow drip of personality revelations for Vash, it all culminates in one encounter: Legato Blue Summers. This is the ultimate climax of the story. Everything about the anime builds to their moment. Legato doesn't want to just beat Vash. That'd be too simple. Instead, he wants to maim, injure, and corrupt. All of the hardships that Vash endures throughout the anime so far has been at the direct hands of Legato, pulling strings from afar and attempting to break him and cause him to stray from his pacifist ideologies. But Vash's decisions begin to take their toll. Against the ever-growing dangers and bloodlust of those against him, the collateral damage begins to mount. While the first half of the anime spends so long establishing Vash's ability to defuse situations, the latter half shows that that's just not enough. Each victory begins to become bittersweet as he loses friends and acquaintances. Vash begins to confront the reality that his choices are costing people their lives. And we see Vash begin to struggle with that realization. His friends are caught in the crossfire, and they're losing their lives because of it. This culminates in two moments, with the first being Wolfwood losing his life. The scene is so beautifully done, from the dialogue they give Wolfwood to the music that's underscoring it. You see Wolfwood reject death. It's not like your stereotypical anime death where they have a smile on their face, where they embrace a honorable death. No, you see him not ready to die, and that alone adds so much weight and impact to this scene. I am not ashamed in saying I cried. Wolfwood's death was a huge nail and tentpole moment of this series, and we don't get a breath from here. Everything is heavy, everything is consequential, and we see the second moment develop. Vash finally confronts Legato, and we have, in my opinion, one of the greatest scenes in all of anime. Legato corners Vash, and he's only left with two options to choose from. He either lets Legato kill Meryl and Millie, or he has to kill Legato himself. Everything has built to this moment. Everything has conditioned you to believe that Vash will figure a way out. Everything points towards a peaceful resolution where Legato is absolved of his sins and Vash can redeem him. And then everything changes. Vash pulls the trigger, kills Legato, and saves his friends. The tension in this climax is astounding, and the tone of the dialogue mixed with the hauntingly beautiful soundtrack makes this a moment you can't forget. The impact and weight of this still gives me goosebumps, and it's such a perfect punctuation to the build-up thus far. In the span of a few episodes, the entire tone of the anime has shifted, and the light-hearted, frivolous Vash from the early episodes is gone. The entire world that has been built up until this point has been flipped on its head, and everything we know has gone out the window. While this isn't the ending for Trigun, the action from here is falling, and essentially serves as an epilogue. There is but one more loose end to tie up. The man Legato worked for is still out there. We see Vash steel himself to confront his brother Knives. We see Vash put himself back together, overcoming the mental scarring that killing Legato has caused. We get another flashback and gain a couple answers to questions. And then we have a final battle. Vash, uninhibited, pitting himself against his brother. In the end, Vash stands victorious, but the ending is left open-ended in regards to whether or not he kills Knives. Trigun is an amazing piece of anime, and accomplishes a tonal shift that is almost unheard of in the medium, and does it perfectly. Watching again Trigun made me fall in love with the characters and the story all over again. That being said, it's still incomplete. To date, Trigun is the only anime where I went and read the manga. If I could pick another anime to get the Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood treatment, it would absolutely be Trigun. While I love the end product we got, being able to get a new, polished version that has more of the story baked in would be a dream. I highly recommend reading Trigun Maximum if you enjoyed the anime, because it offers so much more to the lore and the world, and that is at its core the most important part about Trigun. The way that it establishes its characters and its themes is what is crucial to its success, and the manga just opens that up so much more. Looking back, it's kind of really easy to see why I gravitated to Trigun, and to Vash's story in particular. Much like Vash, everything in my life was in flux and impermanent. People came and went with no continuity guaranteed. Outwardly, you'd never know how lonely I was, always big, loud, and charismatic around people. But inwardly, just yearning for the chaos to stop. Much like Vash as well, the destruction of the worlds around me largely fell outside my control. I had no say in staying put or moving. It was something pushed onto me from my parents. But after each event, we pick ourselves up and keep moving forward.